They say power protects you, that if you wear a uniform, hold a title, or love the right person, the rules bend in your favor. But what happens when someone decides they won't bend anymore? This story isn't about revenge. It's about the moment integrity meets arrogance, when one woman's silence becomes the system's loudest echo. It began like any ordinary stop on Miraflores Street. A checkpoint, a van, and a young woman who believed her boyfriend's badge could shield her from the law. Her name was Damaris. Her boyfriend? Lieutenant Kondo, a man whose power reached further than most, dared to challenge. And the officer who stood in their way, a quiet, unshakable woman named Alejandra Pérez. She didn't shout, she didn't back down, and in a world where justice often wears blindfolds, she decided to keep her eyes wide open. But she didn't know that by stopping that van, she wasn't just enforcing a law, she was lighting a fuse, one that would explode through lies, corruption, and a chain of command built on fear. Because sometimes, it's not the criminals you have to stand up to. It's the ones wearing the same badge as you. So before you scroll away, before you tell yourself this is just another story about power and punishment, listen closely. This isn't just about what happens when someone breaks the law. It's about what happens when someone dares to uphold it. And by the end, you'll have to ask yourself one question. If you were in her place, would you have done the same? Sometimes the biggest storms begin with the calmest skies. The day was warm, ordinary, and deceptively peaceful on Miraflores Street, a stretch of road where cars hummed lazily under the afternoon sun, and police checkpoints came and went like background noise. Nothing extraordinary ever happened there, at least that's what everyone thought. But that afternoon, fate decided to pull over a white van. "Documents and vehicle papers, please," the officer said, his tone sharp but rehearsed. The way people speak when they've said the same sentence 1,000 times before. The woman in the driver's seat, Damaris, smiled politely, digging through her purse. She wasn't nervous yet. After all, she hadn't done anything wrong. Everything seemed routine until the radio on the officer's shoulder crackled to life. "Central. Active unit in pursuit of a white van, license plate LBD 29117, requesting reinforcements on Miraflores Street." The message froze everyone for a second. It was her license plate. The officer's expression shifted from mild professionalism to sudden suspicion. Damaris's stomach dropped. "Wait, there must be a mistake," she said quickly. "I didn't do anything." "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," the officer ordered. "I said step out. Now." The sound of his voice cut through the hum of traffic. People turned their heads as the woman in red heels opened her door, stepping out slowly, confusion clouding her face. She wasn't a criminal. She was the girlfriend of a lieutenant, someone who believed she was untouchable. And maybe that belief was exactly what was about to be tested. The officer motioned toward the van. "Are you carrying anything illegal?" "What? Of course not." "Then you won't mind if we check." He nodded toward another officer, Ramirez, who started searching the van with visible hesitation. Damaris crossed her arms. "Do I look like a criminal to you?" The officer didn't flinch. "You almost ran over 2 officers back there. That's putting lives in danger." Her eyes widened. "That's absurd. I didn't even see anyone." "Exactly," he replied coldly. "That's the problem." The seconds stretched. Her heartbeat quickened. Around them, people whispered, recording with their phones. A scene was unfolding, and Damaris knew it. But she didn't yet realize that this would be the moment that turned her entire world upside down. "Turn around," he said, "for a checkup." She froze. "Excuse me?" "Turn around." It wasn't the words that stung. It was the tone, stripped of patience, heavy with authority, the kind that left no room for argument. Damaris, defiant, lifted her chin. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I don't care who you are," the officer shot back. "Obey now." The air thickened with tension. She took a step closer, her voice trembling between anger and fear. "You're overstepping. You're abusing your power." "Have you consumed any alcoholic beverages today?" he asked flatly, her mouth dropped open. "Why do you care?" He sighed, half to himself, "Because it's my job, and right now you're acting like someone hiding something." That was the last straw. Damaris clenched her fists. "I told you I'm not a criminal, but if you don't let me go in the next 2 seconds, I'm calling my boyfriend." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And who would that be?" "Lieutenant Kando." The name landed like a challenge. A few feet away, Officer Ramirez stopped searching the van and exchanged a nervous glance with his superior. The corporal frowned. "Lieutenant Kando?" he repeated. "As in, our Lieutenant Kando?" Damaris nodded with smug certainty. "That's right. So if you don't want to lose your badges, I suggest you let me go." The corporal exhaled through his nose. "Ma'am, I don't care if you're the president's cousin. You're not above the law." For a second, no one spoke. The heat pressed down like a weight. Then Damaris said quietly, "Fine, you'll regret it." Within moments, she pulled out her phone, dialing the lieutenant's number. The other officers exchanged looks, that uneasy silence that fills the air when someone realizes things are about to spiral out of control. The call connected. "Hi, my love," she said, forcing calm. "They've detained me." On the other end, a man's voice, firm, commanding. "What? Who stopped you?" "They said I ran a checkpoint, but I didn't. They're treating me like a criminal." "Put the officer on the phone." Her tone sharpened. "He wants to talk to you." The corporal hesitated before taking the phone. "Good afternoon, Lieutenant." The voice cut him off. "Last name?" "Ramirez." "Listen carefully, Ramirez. Let my girlfriend go. Now." Every officer there could hear the order. Every one of them understood what it meant. Rank, power, pressure. But the corporal hesitated. "Sir, I'm not in charge of this operation." "Then who is?" "Officer Pérez." "Put her on." That was the moment the storm truly began. Because what no one realized yet, not Damaris, not the lieutenant, not even the officers on Miraflores, was that this wouldn't be a simple argument between law and privilege. It would unravel something much deeper, a test of character, loyalty, and the thin line between doing what's easy and doing what's right. As the corporal lowered the phone, sweat gathering at his temple, the traffic light turned red again. Cars stopped. The world paused. And in that pause, the first domino fell, quietly, almost politely, setting off a chain reaction that would destroy careers, expose corruption, and remind everyone that sometimes power protects, and sometimes it poisons. When the phone rang through the static of a weak signal, everything stopped. The street noise dulled, and the hum of engines faded into the background. All that existed now was a single voice, deep, commanding, and growing colder with every second. "Who is this?" the voice demanded. "Lieutenant Kando, sir," the corporal answered, his tone shifting from firm to cautious. "This is Officer Ramirez." "What's going on?" the lieutenant pressed. Ramirez hesitated, glancing toward the van. "Sir, we stopped a driver who failed to comply at a checkpoint. She's my girlfriend," Kando interrupted, "and you're going to release her immediately." The order wasn't shouted, but it didn't need to be. It was sharp, controlled, the kind of tone that carried years of command behind it. For a second, no one breathed. Even Damaris looked surprised by how fast his temper revealed itself. "Sir," Ramirez tried again carefully, "I'm not in charge of this operation." "Then who is?" "Officer Pérez." "Put her on the phone." Ramirez turned to his superior, Corporal Pérez, a woman with sharp eyes and a steady posture. She didn't look scared. She looked like someone who had heard this tone before. "He wants to speak with you," Ramirez murmured. Pérez shook her head slowly. "Tell him he'll have to wait until the station. We're following procedure." Her words landed like stones. Damaris's jaw tightened. Ramirez returned to the phone, swallowing. "Lieutenant, she says you can speak to her at the station." Silence. Then, the sound of the lieutenant's breathing. Low, steady, dangerous. "Don't move," he said finally. If you want to keep your job, don't move from there. The line went dead. Everyone stood frozen. Pérez adjusted her cap, breaking the tension. Well, she said quietly, now we wait. But Ramirez's face had gone pale. You don't understand. He's really coming. Let him, Pérez replied, calm as ever. If we've done our job right, we've got nothing to fear. Her calm irritated Damaris. You're making a mistake, she snapped. When he gets here, he'll have both of you suspended. If he does, Pérez said, it'll be for following the law, not breaking it. Damaris scoffed. The law? She said. Please, I see plenty of you break it every day. That line hit harder than she realized. For a flicker of a second, Pérez's eyes darkened, not with anger, but disappointment. Maybe that's true, she said quietly, but not today. Minutes passed like hours. The air felt heavier. Every car that slowed down made Ramirez flinch. Somewhere down the road, the growl of an engine grew louder, official, deliberate. And then the black sedan appeared. It stopped inches from the patrol car. The door opened and Lieutenant Kando stepped out, tall, uniform pressed, face carved in authority. He didn't need to announce himself. His rank announced him for him. He went straight to Damaris, his voice softening for her. My love, are you all right? She nodded quickly, playing the part of the wronged civilian. They treated me like a criminal, she said, her voice trembling just enough to draw sympathy. Kando turned sharply to the officers. Who's in charge here? Pérez stepped forward. I am, sir. His gaze was sharp, assessing. You knew who she was and you still detained her? Yes, sir, she replied, unwavering, because she violated procedure. Do you know what's done in cases like this? He asked, taking a step closer. Yes, she said again. We follow the law. His jaw tightened. No, you learn your place. Damaris watched the scene unfold, satisfaction flickering across her face. This was the power she believed she had, influence through proximity. But what she didn't see was the quiet fire burning in Pérez's eyes. Sir, Ramirez interrupted nervously, maybe we should just... No, Pérez cut in. We'll do this by the book. Kando turned on her. Give me the keys, now. The young lady is under arrest, Pérez said. I can't... He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. I don't care why she's under arrest. Are you going to hand over the keys the easy way or the hard way? The moment hung like the edge of a blade. Even Ramirez didn't move. Then Pérez said quietly, if following the law costs me my job, so be it, but I won't trade my badge for favors. For the first time, Kando's face shifted, just slightly, as if the realization struck that she wasn't bluffing. Damaris spoke up, her voice sharp now. You're going to regret this. When this is over, you'll both be gone. But Pérez didn't respond. She simply motioned for Ramirez to hold position. Kando exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You think this is bravery? He said. It's arrogance, and it's going to cost you everything. He turned to Damaris, his tone softening again. Don't worry, my love. I'll handle this. And just like that, he walked toward his car, pulling out his phone to make a call. The sun glinted off his rank pins, symbols of authority, and soon of corruption. Inside the patrol car, Ramirez whispered, You shouldn't have defied him. Pérez looked at him, voice steady. If we let fear decide how we serve, then we've already lost. That was the first time he truly saw her, not just as a superior, but as a wall standing between law and abuse. The next few minutes would decide everything. The lieutenant's next move would either bury the truth or expose the very system he thought he controlled. The radio crackled again. Supervisor en route, hold position. Pérez nodded, eyes fixed on the approaching siren in the distance. Good, she said softly. Let's finish this the right way. The siren echoed long before the car appeared, a low, vibrating wail that rolled through the still air and froze every conversation mid-sentence. Miraflores Street, just minutes ago a tense standoff between authority and arrogance, now felt like the stage of a much larger reckoning. The black patrol SUV turned the corner, its lights flashing blue and white against the fading afternoon sun. The door opened slowly, and the supervisor stepped out. A tall man in his 50s with the calm, deliberate movements of someone who had seen far too much and trusted very few. His name tag read Lieutenant Paul Mendoza, and though he wasn't there to take sides, everyone instinctively knew which side truth usually stood on. Kando straightened his posture, fixing his cap, his tone suddenly polite. "Good afternoon, Lieutenant," he said, feigning composure. Mendoza nodded once. "Good afternoon. Who called for a supervisor?" "I did," said Officer Pérez, stepping forward. "And what exactly is happening here?" Mendoza asked, scanning the scene. The scattered papers on the hood, the still-running van, and the nervous civilians filming from a distance. Pérez took a breath. "Sir, this woman," she gestured to Damaris, "failed to stop at a checkpoint, nearly hit 2 officers, refused a sobriety test, and verbally assaulted us when detained." Damaris rolled her eyes but stayed silent. Mendoza turned toward her. "Ma'am, is this true?" She crossed her arms. "They exaggerated everything. I didn't do anything wrong." "And you are?" "Damaris Salcedo." "And your connection to this officer?" Mendoza asked, nodding toward Kando. Damaris hesitated, then said proudly, "He's my boyfriend." For a moment, the supervisor said nothing. He simply looked at Kando, not with anger but disappointment, the kind that cuts deeper than rage. "Lieutenant," Mendoza began, "is this true?" Kando nodded once. "Yes, sir. And I'm here because my girlfriend has been treated unfairly." "Unfairly," Mendoza repeated, his voice calm, almost too calm. "According to whom?" Kando stiffened. "According to the fact that she was handcuffed and disrespected." "She was detained," Pérez interjected, "because she refused orders and resisted an inspection." Kando turned toward her, his expression icy. "You're out of line, Corporal." But Mendoza raised a hand, silencing them both. "Enough." He looked at Pérez. "Continue." "Sir, after detaining her, she called Lieutenant Kando directly. He then ordered my officer, Ramirez, to release her, which would have been a violation of protocol. When I refused, he arrived on scene and tried to overrule me." A ripple of whispers ran through the bystanders. Kando's jaw tightened. "That's a lie," he said. "I only asked for clarification. She was overstepping her authority." Mendoza's tone sharpened slightly. "Are you implying that enforcing the law is overstepping authority, Lieutenant?" No answer. Pérez continued. "When I refused to release the detainee, he demanded my keys and threatened my position." Damaris scoffed. "Oh, please, this is ridiculous." But Mendoza's gaze never left Kando. "Did you do that?" Kando hesitated, then said quietly, "I might have lost my temper, but I didn't mean it as a threat." Mendoza nodded slowly. "And did you attempt to remove the handcuffs from the detainee yourself?" Kando didn't answer. That silence said everything. "Understood," Mendoza said finally. He turned toward Pérez and Ramirez. "Did either of you use unnecessary force?" "No, sir," Pérez replied. "We followed procedure." Mendoza gave a small nod. "Good, then I'll need statements from both of you, and from you, Lieutenant Kando." Kando frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, this can be handled privately." Mendoza's tone hardened. "That's exactly the problem. Too many things get handled privately." The air went cold. Damaris shifted uncomfortably, realizing the balance of power had changed. Then Mendoza asked quietly, "Lieutenant, were you aware that we've been conducting random integrity checks on our officers?" Kando blinked. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying," Mendoza said, stepping closer, "that today, of all days, might have been the worst time to test the law." A murmur ran through the gathered officers. Mendoza continued, his voice low but resonant. "You see, I already had a reason to be here. Reports of favoritism. suspicious releases, whispered complaints that some officers were using rank to protect the wrong people. Today just gave me the proof I needed. Kando's composure cracked for the first time. "Sir, this is absurd." "Is it?" Mendoza cut in. "Because I've already reviewed part of the checkpoint feed. There's video, audio, every word." Silence. Damaris paled. "Now," Mendoza said, stepping back, "let's finish this correctly. Officer Pérez placed the detainee back under arrest for obstructing an operation." Damaris gasped. "You can't do that." "Yes, we can," Pérez said calmly, retrieving the cuffs. Kando moved forward instinctively, but Mendoza's hand shot up again. "Not another word, Lieutenant. You're already one step away from obstruction yourself." The moment stretched. The sound of the cuffs locking echoed louder than the surrounding traffic. Mendoza turned to Ramirez. "File an immediate report on everything you witnessed. I want it on my desk by morning." "Yes, sir." "And, Lieutenant," Mendoza said, his voice now cool but final, "you'll accompany us back to the station. We'll determine whether you're fit to continue serving while this investigation proceeds." Kando's face went red. "You can't treat me like this." Mendoza met his eyes, unflinching. "You treated yourself like this." Damaris broke in, desperate now. "Paul, please." But Mendoza didn't look at her. He motioned to Pérez. "Escort her to the car." As Pérez led Damaris away, Kando stood motionless, his hands twitching at his sides, realizing the chain of command he once relied on no longer shielded him. Mendoza turned to his team. "Let this be a reminder," he said firmly. "Our rank means nothing if it doesn't serve the law." The sound of sirens faded into the distance again, but this time they didn't signal danger. They signaled accountability, and as the patrol convoy pulled away from Miraflores Street, the world felt slightly heavier, yet a little more honest. That night, the city lights shimmered like broken glass on wet asphalt. In a narrow office on the second floor of the precinct, Officer Alejandra Pérez sat alone at her desk, staring at the incident report. The paper was clean, the handwriting steady, but every sentence carried the weight of something heavier, the truth. Outside her window, sirens echoed somewhere far off. For most officers, that sound was routine. For her, it was a reminder of the thin, fragile line she had chosen to defend. Her partner Ramirez walked in quietly, holding 2 cups of lukewarm coffee. "You haven't left since the report?" he asked. "I'll leave when this is signed," she said without looking up. Ramirez sighed. "You really think it'll make a difference?" "It has to," she said simply. "If it doesn't, then none of us are wearing these badges for the right reason." He hesitated before sitting down. "They're saying the lieutenant's furious, that he's trying to call in favors to bury the report." Pérez looked up. "Then let him try, because this time I've already sent copies to Internal Affairs." Ramirez blinked. "You... what?" "I knew he'd do this," she said. "Men like Kando don't surrender power. They infect everything around them. That's why people like us have to keep the evidence before they burn it." There was silence, the type that only exists when courage and fear occupy the same room. Down the hall, a heavy door slammed. 2 voices echoed, one calm, the other sharp and furious. "Where is she?" Pérez didn't need to look up. She recognized that voice instantly. Moments later, Lieutenant Kando stormed into the office, his uniform slightly undone, anger radiating off him. "Corporal Pérez," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We need to talk." Ramirez stood, instinctively stepping between them. "Sir, maybe you should—" "Out!" Kando snapped. Ramirez hesitated, looked at Pérez, then slowly left the room. The silence stretched. Only the hum of the fluorescent light filled the space. Kando leaned forward. "You made a mistake, Corporal." "I made a report," she said evenly. He laughed, low, bitter. "You think that'll protect you? The system eats people like you alive." "Maybe," she said, "but at least I won't choke on corruption while it does." His expression hardened. Do you know what happens when you go against someone like me? You lose everything. Your rank, your reputation, your future." She met his stare. "Then I guess that's the price of integrity." Something in her tone, quiet, unwavering, unnerved him. He stepped closer. "You're idealistic," he said. "You think justice exists because it should, but out here, justice belongs to whoever has the power to define it." "Then maybe it's time someone redefined it," Pérez replied. Kando smiled thinly. "You think you're a hero, but heroes fall, and when they do, no one catches them." "Maybe," she said again, "but they still fall standing." Before he could respond, the door opened. Lieutenant Paul Mendoza entered, holding a folder. His presence changed the temperature of the room instantly. "Lieutenant Kando," Mendoza said calmly, "you're needed in my office." Kando turned, smirking. "Am I under arrest now, too?" "Not yet," Mendoza replied, "but you're under review. The investigation's been escalated to internal affairs." Kando's confidence faltered. "That's impossible. It hasn't even been 24 hours. "That's the thing about justice," Mendoza said, opening the folder. "Sometimes it's faster than you think." He handed over a sheet of paper. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation for obstruction of duty, attempted bribery, and abuse of authority." Kando froze. His voice dropped to a whisper. "You're making a mistake." "No," Mendoza said quietly. "You made it when you thought your badge meant power instead of service." The room went still. Kando's jaw tightened, his last ounce of pride bleeding through the cracks. "You'll regret this, all of you." He turned, slamming the door on his way out. Pérez exhaled slowly. Mendoza placed the folder on her desk. "You did the right thing," he said, "but you'll need to stay cautious. When powerful men fall, they like to drag others down with them." "I'm not afraid," she said softly. "Just tired." He nodded. "That's how I know you're a good cop." Later that night, Pérez left the precinct. The streets were quieter now. No sirens, no shouting, just the whisper of a city pretending to sleep. As she crossed the parking lot, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" A low voice spoke. "You think this is over?" Click. The line went dead. Her grip tightened on the phone, but she didn't call back. She didn't need to. Fear was the reaction he wanted, and she wouldn't give it to him. Instead, she raised her head and kept walking. A week later, the headlines hit every local station. Lieutenant arrested for bribery and evidence tampering. Investigation reveals systemic corruption inside traffic division. Pérez watched from the cafeteria, coffee in hand, expression unreadable. Ramirez joined her, grinning faintly. "Guess the system did listen this time." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe it just ran out of excuses." He tilted his head. "Do you think he'll actually go to prison?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But for once, he'll stand where he made others stand, in front of the truth." Ramirez nodded. "And Damaris?" Pérez smiled faintly. "The same place as him. She thought love made her untouchable. Turns out, it just made her complicit." As the TV continued to replay Kando's arrest footage, handcuffs glinting under the same sunlight he once commanded, Pérez turned off the screen. Because justice wasn't about celebration. It was about silence, the kind that follows when lies finally stop echoing. She stood, finished her coffee, and looked at the precinct door. Outside, a new morning waited. Bright, uncertain, but honest. And for the first time in a long time, Alejandra Pérez smiled. The morning after the verdict, the precinct felt different. Not louder, not quieter, just lighter. Like a storm had finally passed, leaving behind a silence that wasn't empty. It was clean. Officer Alejandra Pérez walked through the corridor with her head high, her uniform crisp, her steps calm. For months, she had carried the weight of every choice she made. The fear, the defiance, the long nights wondering if integrity would ever be enough. But today, she wasn't wondering anymore. As she approached the captain's office, She could see reporters gathered outside the main gate. Cameras, microphones, the hungry faces of people who loved a scandal but rarely understood the cost of one. This time, however, the story wasn't about disgrace. It was about something rarer: redemption through courage. Inside, Lieutenant Paul Mendoza stood by the window, sunlight brushing across his shoulders. He didn't turn immediately when she entered. "You came," he said finally. "I said I would," she replied. He smiled faintly, the kind that held both pride and sorrow. They finalized it this morning. The lieutenant and his girlfriend, both charged with corruption, coercion, and attempted obstruction of justice. Pérez nodded slowly. "And Ramirez?" "He told the truth," Mendoza said. "He's getting a commendation for cooperation." Pérez exhaled, relief softening her expression. For once, doing the right thing hadn't ended in punishment. Mendoza reached for a file and handed it to her. Inside, a letter of recommendation, stamped, signed, and approved. "What's this?" she asked. "Your promotion," he said simply, "effective immediately. You've earned it." She blinked, speechless for the first time in weeks. "I didn't do this for that." "I know," he said, smiling. "That's why you deserve it." For a moment, silence filled the room again. Not awkward, but sacred. The kind of silence that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. Outside, as Pérez stepped back into the daylight, the city felt alive again. Vendors shouting, children laughing, horns honking, chaos and humanity tangled together, just as it always had been. But her eyes drifted toward the courthouse across the street. A small crowd had gathered. They were escorting Lieutenant Cando and Damaris Salcedo through the doors, cameras flashing like lightning around them. He was no longer in uniform, just a man in handcuffs, his confidence stripped away, his face pale and unreadable. Damaris followed behind, tears streaking her makeup, her expensive heels clacking against the marble floor. For a second, their eyes met across the distance. No words passed between them, but in that gaze lived an entire story. Arrogance, downfall, and the cruel clarity that always arrives too late. Pérez turned away. She didn't need revenge. Watching them face the same justice they had once mocked was enough. She walked down the street, the wind brushing through her hair, and thought about all the times she had been told to just let things go. But letting things go had never changed anything. Sometimes you had to hold on, not for yourself, but for every person who couldn't. That evening, she sat on the balcony of her small apartment, coffee steaming in her hands. The sunset painted the sky in gold and ash, the same colors that marked endings and beginnings. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ramirez. "They're talking about you on the news. They're calling you the officer who said no." She laughed softly. The officer who said no. It wasn't fame. It wasn't glory. It was proof that sometimes saying no, to corruption, to fear, to injustice, could echo louder than any gunshot. She looked up at the fading light and whispered to herself, maybe this is what justice really looks like. Not perfection, just people who refuse to give up. Meanwhile, inside a dimly lit interrogation room, Lieutenant Cando sat across from two internal affairs officers. His hands trembled as he signed the last page of his confession. The arrogance that once filled his every word was gone, replaced by something quieter, realization. "I just wanted to protect her," he muttered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." One of the officers replied, "You weren't protecting her. You were protecting your pride." And for once, Cando didn't argue. Across the hall, Damaris sat alone, her reflection staring back from the two-way glass. The woman who once threatened officers with her boyfriend's power now looked small, almost fragile. When the guard entered to escort her, she whispered, "Tell Officer Pérez, I'm sorry." But that message never reached her, because true apologies, like justice, have to be lived, not spoken. Days later, Pérez returned to duty. She walked past the new recruits, young faces filled with the same mixture of fear and hope she once carried. One of them saluted her nervously. "Ma'am," he said, "you're the one who took down the corrupt lieutenant, right?" She smiled. "I didn't take anyone down," she said. "I just stood up." And that, more than anything, was the lesson no one saw coming. That integrity doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you unstoppable. That power, when abused, always collapses under the weight of truth, and that even in a world full of manipulation and fear, one honest person, one quiet act of defiance, can reset the balance. As she walked toward her patrol car, the morning sun lit her badge, not as a symbol of authority, but of something far greater: accountability. The city roared to life around her again, imperfect, chaotic, human. And in that noise, she smiled, because for the first time in a long time, justice didn't just sound like a word. It felt like a heartbeat. Integrity may cost you your comfort, your rank, even your peace, but it will never cost you your soul. When the handcuffs clicked shut, it wasn't just another arrest. It was history correcting itself, one decision at a time. Lieutenant Kando thought his rank made him untouchable. Damaris thought her love could rewrite the law. But both forgot one simple truth: power means nothing when it serves only pride. Officer Pérez didn't win a medal. She didn't need to. Her victory was quieter, but far more lasting, because she proved that justice isn't about strength. It's about persistence. It's about standing alone when silence would be easier. It's about saying no to the very people who expect your obedience and still saluting the badge, not the man behind it. When the dust settled, Kando and Damaris faced their judgment. And Pérez? She faced something rarer: peace. But this story isn't really about police or power or law. It's about us. Every time we look away from something wrong because it's not our problem, every time we trade truth for comfort, every time we say, "That's just how the system works." Because corruption doesn't begin in courtrooms or precincts, it begins in hearts. The moment we stop believing integrity still matters. But here's the miracle: one person still can make a difference. A single no, whispered at the right time, can silence 1,000 lies. So if this story left you angry, let it. If it left you inspired, hold on to that feeling, because maybe the world doesn't need more heroes in uniforms. Maybe it just needs more people like Alejandra, ordinary, tired, brave, who choose what's right, even when it costs them everything. And if you've ever felt small, unheard, or outnumbered, remember this: integrity doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you unforgettable. This story is a work of fiction inspired by moral and emotional themes. It does not depict real people, organizations, or events. All characters and scenarios are created for educational and entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else remember that truth still matters. Would you have done what Alejandra did? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe for more life-changing stories that remind us the smallest act of courage can still change the biggest system.